Well, War Child was created in 1999, and for me, it came out of about 5 years of working in the field with different organizations on the ground and seeing what was being done right, but also where the opportunities were, what gaps were being missed. And in particular, when you're talking about countries that are experiencing war, a lot of people are focusing on the short-term emergency needs, but not a lot of people are actually tackling some of the structural deficits around poverty and children's rights and education and skills training that actually would, over time, help to erode conflict and give people opportunities to actually begin the process of rebuilding their lives. And that's the gap that War Child addresses. So that was 12 years ago now, almost. And since that time, the organization has really grown in remarkable ways. We're now in about 9 different war-torn regions. We have over 250,000 children and their families that participate in our programs every year, focusing on education, on child rights, especially around sexual and gender-based violence, and also focusing on poverty reduction initiatives through skills training for young people and for women, and catch-up learning programs and microfinance initiatives. And in addition to that, we now have 200 staff around the world, mostly nationals within war-torn countries, who run and manage and work for our programs. So we're pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish, but obviously there's still a lot of work to do. We make quite a few different mistakes, and I don't like to even characterize them as mistakes. I think we make a lot of assumptions around what's going to be most necessary and most useful. And often we see a crisis in the news or a natural disaster, and we respond generously, and that's really important. You know, it is important when we see things happening in other parts of the world. It is important to give, especially when you consider that between 5 and 10% of Canadian donations each year go to support international humanitarian causes. There actually isn't overall a lot of funding to be able to help in times of need. So giving is really, really important, but there are ways that you can maximize your contribution. You know, one of the things is that when you give once and then walk away, we expect things to turn around, and Haiti is a perfect example. We all responded, Canadians responded very generously after the Haitian earthquake, but the needs were great before the earthquake, and the needs are just as great now, almost 2 years after the earthquake. And it's when we begin to make those consistent investments in people's lives, when we make it possible for local people on the ground to have the tools and the resources and the sustained commitment to be able to make those changes and to be their own architects of those changes instead of exporting all of this or bringing in all of this foreign expertise. That when we contribute to that over a longer period of time, that's when we begin to see aid that is well managed. You know, it takes no less than a generation to see the effects of well-managed aid. And it often takes a full generation to get there, to see those changes realized and to see those improvements in educational indicators and health indicators and economic indicators for women and for children. So the better thing to do when you're seeing a crisis in the news is not to give once, to make even a smaller contribution and to become a monthly donor, and to do that for a longer period of time so that organizations know that they have that kind of funding, they can plan properly, and they can make that kind of sustained commitment and investment in people's lives. Well, first of all, St. Michael's University School, I mean, is one of our landmark schools. I mean, you're almost, it's hard to even describe you as anything other than a founding school of War Child. You've been around for the journey right from the very beginning. You're celebrating your 10-year anniversary. We're celebrating our 12th year anniversary. And so I think that there is, for us as an organization, as War Child, there is just so much pride and also gratitude that we have great partners like SMU. I mean, it's just fantastic for us, and I hope it's been fantastic for the students as well. You have raised close to $50,000, which has benefited a number of our different programs around the world. Programs in Congo, Eastern Congo, in Darfur, Sudan. I think as well you've helped our programs in northern Uganda. So because you've been there for so long, we've been able to continue on with those programs. places like Eastern Congo, where 7-8 years ago, kids that were formerly child soldiers that were being sent back into their communities that were very vulnerable to criminal gangs and other militia groups, who had lost out on 7-8 years of schooling because of the fighting, because of the support that we've had, War Child, and that the investments we've been able to make in those communities. Many of those kids were able to catch up on their missed schooling by participating in our catch-up learning programs. We've been training teachers, which makes it possible for those schools to function. We've been actively rebuilding schools with those communities, getting kids back into the classrooms, mobilizing communities around girls' education. And now 7-8 years later, those same kids who would often talk to us about feeling hopeless and feeling as if there really was no future for them are now graduating, and they are going on and fulfilling their dreams of becoming doctors and lawyers and business people, and able to really have the kind of hope that we never would have thought possible. So if it were not for the consistent kind of partnerships that we've seen, and the school here is a fantastic example of that, and the students and the teachers, we wouldn't be able to do this work. And we are, I think that any success that we've had is a success that we all share. People participating in Keep the Beat learn the lessons of philanthropy and what it means to give and what it means to raise money and to ask other people to raise money and to think about our world and our role in our world. And it's about, it's in one way it is a fundraising program, but it's more than that. It's also about education. It's about our sense of community and connecting with people in other parts of the world and experiencing that kind of solidarity and support. And I also think that, especially because it's so tied to music and to activism, it's also a celebration. It's a celebration of what we can accomplish together. Well, I think whenever you're doing an overseas volunteer trip, you again need to ask the very hard questions of yourself before anybody gets on a plane. It has to do with context and with understanding that context. Are there people on the ground who are potentially losing an opportunity to be employed as a result of that volunteer labor going overseas? Is it a missed training opportunity for other young people within those countries who might very well want and deserve and be asking for exactly these kinds of opportunities, but aren't getting those kinds of opportunities because internationals are coming in and doing that work instead of them, and not in a way that is inclusive? I'm not suggesting that that's the case, but I think, again, it speaks to the kinds of questions that we're asking. Orphanages are a particularly difficult issue because there are many examples around the world of ways in which people's good intentions have been used and manipulated in a number of different contexts in ways that actually are not healthy for those children on the ground. And there are some, less reputable volunteer organizations that actually are reported to keep the conditions deliberately squalid because when they do that, people feel, even more guilty, and they give more money, and they feel that the needs are even greater. But meanwhile, the people that are on the ground running these types of operations are actually personally profiting from them. So, it's really important to know what the local context is, to ask the very hard questions, to know what good, sustainable development means. If you can't answer some basic questions around what were they doing before we got here, and what are they going to do after we leave, and are we contributing to something that is a longer term initiative? These are exactly the kinds of questions that we need to be asking, and it's important to be sure that you have the answers before you set foot in another country. Otherwise, there's nothing wrong with being a tourist. It's great. Spend your tourist dollars, spend it in local markets and local economies, on local women's cooperatives. You'll be making a tremendous difference. And you'll see the wonder and beauty of Africa or any other continent in the world. But we don't necessarily need to distract ourselves with busy work philanthropy if it's not the right thing to be doing. For students who want to be ethical citizens, it starts with knowledge and information. Take the time to continue learning, read and follow international news, even if it's one or two pieces of international news every single week. I know people are overloaded. You got lots of information coming at you all the time, but it's not that difficult. And War Child also tries to make it easy for people through our War Child Twitter feed. I do Samantha Nutt as well. We post articles that we find interesting and useful for people to read and keep up with information. So that's really important. So knowledge and information is really important. Also giving, which you're already doing, which is a phenomenal way to show that you're committed to these kinds of issues and to really work to restore some of the injustices that we're facing on a global level, and giving people the tools to help them survive, but also do more than survive, to get out of poverty and to begin rebuilding their lives. The third part of it, though, too, is about being aware about where our consumer goods are coming from. Many of the products that are being used all the time by us, whether it's our cell phones and our computers and our video game consoles, our electronics, are manufactured with pieces of minerals and metals that are mined, for example, in Eastern Congo, that are contributing to the conflict in that part of the world. So it's also asking the really hard questions when you're making choices around what to buy and where to spend your money. And then I guess the last part of it is really that to continue to think in socially responsible terms. Good global citizenship is really, more than anything else, it's an attitude about our role in the world and about what matters to us as human beings and what binds us together as human beings. And to not think that just because something is taking place in another part of the world that it shouldn't concern us, or that there's not a difference that can be made there, and that we're not all a part of the problem, but we can also all be part of the solution at the same time. Well, one of my favorite writers is Ursula Franklin, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for her. And one of the things that she says around how you can make a difference is that sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't have to actually have all of the answers. Sometimes it's enough to ask the questions, and that it's in asking the questions that you can provoke social change. And coltan is a good example of this. It is for many people, it is a very complicated issue, and it's hard to kind of follow the dots. So something is mined in Eastern Congo. Is it necessarily a conflict resource? It may be a conflict resource. It may not be a conflict resource. It depends on where it's coming from. And there's legislation that's been put forward, primarily in the United States, but in Canada we did have some legislation, but it didn't come to pass, around sourcing minerals properly and tracking the supply chain. And these are some of the issues I do get into in Damnations, in terms of what needs to change around the mining industry, especially in Eastern Congo, that would help to interrupt this cycle of violence that comes from resource extraction in troubled parts of the world. But for most people, some of those arguments get really detailed, and it's easy to get lost in those details. And so my recommendation to anyone really is, the next time you want to go and buy a cell phone and a video game console or a computer, you can't be sure right now, at this moment in time, that is 100% conflict-free. The mechanisms just don't exist. But the more of us that are asking those questions, those really hard questions of those manufacturers, the more responsive they will be to some of these international movements. And that is one of the most important things that you can do. There are other examples that I get into in the book. There are some great groups all around the world, from Global Witness to the Enough Project, that are actually working very hard on this issue, and that are very open to people going onto their website and sending petitions and making it easy. But the most important thing is just to ask. Well, I wrote Damnations primarily to begin a conversation and to share some of the experiences and lessons that I've learned from the last 16 years of doing this work in different war-torn environments, to introduce readers to some of the most courageous and brilliant and passionate and dedicated humanitarians that I have met over the years, who inspired me and who continue to inspire me, and I hope will inspire readers. But also to really encourage and to ask those thought-provoking questions, and to hopefully have an influence, I think, on how people understand the role that we might play in the world that can be both positive and negative, and what we might do differently.